You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's time now for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. That means we welcome back Erica L. Ayala. Erica, lots going on in the world of women's hockey. Let's start with a new coach for PWHL New York.
Indeed. We talked about it on one of our previous women's hockey spotlights. Would New York be able to place someone in their head coach role before the draft? And that is something that they were able to accomplish. They had the number one pick. We'll get into that in a minute, but they named their new head coach, Greg Fargo, just ahead of the draft. He's coming from Colgate University. He spent the last 12 seasons there as the head coach of the women's hockey program. If you know anything about women's hockey, you know that Colgate has been one of those teams, Rachel, right, that's been in the mix in the NCAA. Yeah. And we've seen players from Colgate go into the NWHL and slash PHF prior to the PWHL existing. So, you know, someone with women's hockey experience is definitely what we wanted. It's at the college level, and sometimes there can be a little bit of a learning curve there. But overall, I think someone that knows women's hockey is always a bonus, always a plus when you're looking to fill a role in a women's hockey league.
Absolutely. I think, that was exactly what we were looking for. Maybe not him in particular, wasn't really a name we brought up, but somebody who was deeply familiar with women's hockey was important for this team, who would care about this program in a special kind of way. And Greg Fargo seems like he's that guy.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see what Fargo does with the rest of the coaching staff, because there were some coaches under the PWHL New York that had pro women's hockey experience. We mentioned a few of them. So I'm very curious to see how they fill out their staff. But Gil, they also had the number one pick. And I feel like it's a pretty good thing to have a head coach in place even though usually it's the GM and the front office staff that's picking, but probably a good idea for you to have that coach in place sitting at the table, as we heard from, Pascal Daou, who is the GM. And with that first overall pick, I think it was pretty obvious who to take here, but they take Sarah Fillier, who has played in the NCAA at Princeton. And of course, Gil has been a mainstay with Hockey Canada on the women's senior team for quite some time.
Yeah, a solid first overall pick, no question about it. And look, PWHL New York needs to improve, and getting a coach in place and getting that number one pick in place, those are two steps along that road.
And, I think right before we hit the stoppage because of COVID, Princeton was a really interesting team, a team that I think was vying for an opportunity to compete in the Frozen Four and potentially a championship. But after that stumble out the gate, and of course we know the Ivy League, all of the Ivy League schools really decided to lean into keeping their players and effectively their students safe. And so there was a little bit of a slower rollout, or return, I should say, to play. And so while maybe Princeton didn't ever really get there, I know there is one program, Rachel, and you're kind of wearing their colors, it looks like, that absolutely, once we got the restart in sports, in women's hockey in particular, took off running. And I think that's reflected in how many players from The Ohio State University were drafted.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the first round, I mean, we joke about Kayla Barnes, but she did attend Ohio State University, and Hannah Bilka picked before her to Boston, Kayla Barnes going to Montreal. It just shows the strength of that program. And there are so many top names in the women's game that have come out of that program.
Yeah, it's really great to see what Nadine Mazeral has been able to do there. A program also, or I should say a school that's invested in women's hockey. And so you'll love to see it there. I think also something worth noting is, and we talked about this a little bit, PWHL New York, they couldn't quite sign Claire Thompson. She was at NYU in medical school, and
Yep.
It was reported, though, that she entered the draft. She also has since said that she's taking a little bit of time away from her studies because effectively she felt, hey, I might not be able to play hockey forever, but theoretically, I can return to school and still fulfill that part of my dream and career path. So I thought that was interesting. And she goes third overall to the state of hockey, who hosted the draft. We have a lot of stuff to catch up with Minnesota, but how do you like this
Yes.
pick, defender Claire Thompson?
I really like this pick a lot. I think that, it's a little bit of a risk given, the reentry process into the game for her, but her skill level is so high. And I feel like for a championship team to pick up a talent like her is a rare opportunity, and you have to take it.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing that we see, Gil, before we get into awards, is that there was some question as to if the PWHL, excuse me, would be able to attract any talent from Europe, not just who are already in the NCAA system at one of the programs playing in North America, or I guess even U Sports, but if they could attract professional athletes who are already playing professional women's hockey overseas to this league. And I think we did get a good mix. We have players from Russia, Sweden, Austria, a lot of them, Czechia. I love Team Czechia, so I love to see that alongside, of course, the United States and Canada. And this seems to be we've certainly seen that on the NHL side, right? A growing trend of players coming from all kinds of countries and being able to infuse a different style of play at the pro level.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the long-term health of the league to have that players coming from different countries and getting international interest in the game. And like you said, adding different styles, different approaches. I think in the long run, this is very good. And it also, I think, in the long run, the more players you can bring in from Europe, the easier it will be to expand.
Yeah, for sure. And so we want to get into awards now. So we talked a little bit about the future. Now let's talk about who we saw as the pioneers who laid the foundation in the first season. So we talked about and ran through some of the awards and the finalists. So what the PWHL did is, and I really like this idea, right? We see this, I guess, on the NHL side, but we've never really seen this kind of model in women's hockey, where you have an event for the awards. So they mixed the draft, which was the first day, and then the second day they had everyone stick around for awards. And I was a little bit concerned, Rachel. I know we talked about it. We talked about how Spooner was having a fantastic season, how she has a fantastic story, and she did pretty well in the inaugural PWHL awards.
She did. She racked up 4 of the awards. Now, it was obvious that she was going to get the leading scorer and top goal scorer because the stats are there, right? You cannot argue with the numbers there. But as far as forward of the year and the overall MVP award, I think forward of the year was pretty obvious as well. But the overall league MVP award, maybe not so much, because there's a lot of options there, a lot of great players in this league. But I really think she deserved it. I think that when you look at her overall game and what she was able to accomplish, she deserved that Billie Jean King MVP award.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned it. She gets the MVP and forward of the year. Other awards we had now rookie of the year. So this is always interesting. I don't know that you really
the first year of a league.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think, and this is the thing that I think is interesting in women's sports, because we see starts and stops much more than we see on the men's side, unless it's, arena football, I guess. But so there's a difference between being a rookie, a true rookie who has no pro experience, and then literally everyone being in their first season. So rookie of the year goes to PWHL Minnesota player Grace Zumwinkle. Led the Minnesota team in scoring 11 goals and 19 points in 24 games. Oh, by the way, en route to the first ever championship. Other finalists were Emma Malte and Alina Mueller. Coach of the Year award went to PWHL Toronto. Of course, and I think it's always worth saying, right, Gil? These are regular season awards.
Yes, voted on before the playoffs take place. And by the time they're awarded, everyone is always like, but wait. But no, it wasn't done that way.
Right, exactly. Troy Ryan stumbled kind of out the gate, it felt like, for PWHL Toronto. But to our point, and again, Gil just said it, this is a regular season award. And I do think Troy Ryan and his staff, they were able to just stick around and then get their team to perform in a really good way. Speaking of PWHL Toronto, they also get goaltender of the year, Kristen Campbell. Now, this is interesting because, again, Toronto struggled. And it seemed at times, Soupy, nickname, of course, obvious nickname, struggled as well. Goaltender of the year, I'm not mad at it, Rachel. And I think there are probably some other candidates that maybe would have been top of my list. Again, we can't necessarily say Aaron Frankel just because it might be recency bias if you're looking at the playoffs, right? But I do think Corrine Schroeder, and it's hard. It's hard, right, Gil, in any league for a player, especially a goaltender that's playing outstanding for a bad team, to win this kind of award.
Always difficult. And when you're facing more shots, you could have a great save percentage and still give up 4 or 5 goals in a game. That definitely makes it more difficult. Let's put it that way.
But it goes to Campbell. Again, not mad. I'm always curious what the full conversation was. A 199 goals against average and a save percentage overall of 927. Frankel and Schroeder were both finalists there. I think defender is always interesting. Do you look at someone who's producing offensively, or are you really looking at shutdown defense? I think this is a pretty solid choice in Erin Ambrose. 18 points in 24 games, including 14 assists. The other finalists were Megan Keller and Ella Shelton. I might have given it to Shelton. There were so many times where anything good that was happening for PWHL New York was because of Ella Shelton.
Yeah, I think for me, that's probably the direction I would have gone in, except for the fact that, we talk about plus minus as a useless stat, but she was on the negative side of that.
Well, yeah.
And because of the team,
New York was on the negative side.
It's very much a team.
Right. Yeah. And then the counter argument is like, well, even considering all that, she actually put some points on the board as a defenseman. And I think that's kind of the argument for on a team that wasn't that good as a defenseman to put points on the board like that. I don't know. I can see the argument going both ways.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. But so overall, I think pretty solid. Spooner, along with Marie-Philippe Poulin, Alex Carpenter, Shelton, and Ambrose, and Kristen Campbell, all make first team. Second team included Brianne Jenner, Sarah Nurse, Zumwinkle, who we mentioned, Renata Fast, Megan Keller, and Aaron Frankel, who we also mentioned. All rookie, Emma Malte. Emma Malte really should have won all rookie for social. That Steve Harvey remix with Carly Jackson was fantastic. Alina Mueller, Grace Zumwinkle, Ashton Bell, Sophie Jakes, and Emma Soderberg. Okay, we got through the awards, and now we kind of got to talk about PWHL Minnesota. You win a title, you're hosting the draft and awards, and somehow none of that is the top story. They fired their general manager leading into the draft. That upset Minnesota fans. And then also, so Minnesota fans, Ken Klee is the head coach. He, I guess, is taking over now in a dual role, which we see a lot in women's sports. I don't love it, but hey, it is what it is. I think the way that I can summarize how fans felt about this is that there was a fan in the stands that had a sign that read "Klee is not Kenuff," from the Barbie movie, which I thought was hilarious. There were boos. A la Gary Bettman walking into any hockey function. But then they also made a pick which got not just Minnesota fans upset, Rachel, but it got other women's women's hockey fans upset. They picked Britta Curl out of Wisconsin with their second round pick. And that is troublesome for a lot of women's sports fans, especially women's hockey fans, because Britta Curl has engaged with conversations on social media that are that a lot of people deem homophobic and even racist. And as we see hockey trying to really clean some of that up, I think with the suspect, I would say, dismissal of Natalie Darwitz, who led the team to a title, and then getting Britta Curl. Also, Ken Klee did not go up on the stage when Britta was announced in a la, I don't know who thinks this is a great idea, but they had a black man and a woman up there instead of the general manager / head coach, even though he apparently was on the stage for everyone else. Just, it left a bad taste in folks' mouth, Rachel.
It really did. And especially, sending up somebody who, like a woman who is married to a woman, to make this pick. I just felt like that was so inappropriate on so many levels to try and justify this pick, because clearly they knew there was something wrong with it to make that decision. And if you know there's something wrong with it, don't make the pick. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and then Ken Klee spoke. He was asked if he spoke to anyone from the LGBT community. He said, I talk with players, with coaches. That's tough for me to answer. I spoke with a lot of different people. At the end of the day, I was told she's a great teammate. And, they were asked about Mira going up there, as you mentioned, famous hockey player, but also queer. And we have people in that community, and obviously Mira making that selection for us, I think that speaks volumes for us. So to your point, it was very intentional. And I think it does speak volumes, but not in the way Ken Klee thinks it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess we will see how this all pans out, but 1 year in the books and some new faces to the mix. Gil will have to come back in another week or so to talk about what is next for the PWHL.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having you back and talking about that. It's always interesting. And Erica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.